I am Primal Piggy. Thank you for joining me for our special Halloween edition BDSM United podcast. Today, we want to talk about 22 terrifying sexual fantasies. Not every fantasy or fetish is safe, legal, or really right to act upon. Safe, sane, and consensual was the universal safety mantra of BDSM until we kind of admitted that some acceptable sex practices are not really implicitly safe. Although their risks can be alleviated by playing smartly. That's why we prefer the mantra of RAC. That stands for Risk Aware Consensual Kink. If you're interested in fisting or suspension bondage, gut punching, ball busting, or things that are considered heavy bondage related BDSM, that's fine. You can do these things as long as you do them consensually and fully prepared for the risks. What makes things BDSM and what makes things outside of BDSM, really consent draws the hard line. And you're not allowed to cross this line. Not ever. You may never do anything without anyone or to anyone without their permission, without their consent. While these rules sound obvious, they exist for a reason. There are many terrifying fetishes in the world. Fetishes that fall far outside of these limits. And acting on them will oftentimes land you in prison. It'll hurt you. More importantly, it'll hurt others. We definitely want to have others focus with what we're doing. These need to be talked about because they're real and many people have them. And knowledge is power. And talking about them keeps everyone safer. So let's look at these 22 terrifying fantasies. Autoerotic asphyxiation. Around 1,000 Americans annually find loved ones dead of self-inflicted autoerotic asphyxiation. These deaths are rarely seen as suicides. Most are simply dangerous acts of self-pleasure gone wrong. When you cut off oxygen to your brain, the result can be a euphoric high, and some attempt this during masturbation with ropes or cords or putting plastic bags over their head, and doing so is deadly. It's really easy to pass out, to suffocate, and die. The most famous case of autoerotic asphyxiation is the 2009 death of David Carradine, who played the title character in Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill Volume 2. He was found dead in his Bangkok hotel room. Although his death was immediately assumed as suicide, they later ruled it as accidental. Shortly after, two of his former wives came forward and said that Carradine was into self-bondage. And that can often be a dangerous fetish. It's something that you definitely need to be aware of the risks and do it safely. Kinky people, we know the risks of breath play. As a kink, we really need to be sure that we're doing it sober and doing it with someone else. And if you're interested in things like gas masks or breath play, you can be one of those happy, healthy, kinky people who enjoy it, as long as you know the risks that are involved. It can definitely be a part of BDSM play, and oftentimes you want to know where and how, and there's a lot of technique involved into how to cut off the breath supply and do it more safely. Not entirely safely. There's always risks involved. Number 2 is the fetish for disfigurement and or permanent bodily injury. Some more submissive people get turned on by the thought of being permanently disfigured by their dominance. Now, if consent is given, are you allowed to injure or disfigure someone? Well, it's definitely against the law. We don't pardon people who intentionally permanently injure someone else, even if it's done with the other person's consent. Oftentimes we say this, that a lot of things within BDSM are criminal. because in a lot of places you can't give consent to be injured, disfigured, or killed. And so we definitely don't want to do anything or tell you to do anything without you first mitigating the risks and checking with your local jurisdictions, making sure that something that you're doing is safe. And we definitely want to press that this is important, that you always negotiate and you vet the people that you are wanting to play with, because it's important. A permanent disfigurement or a permanent bodily injury is a serious thing. And so, definitely, if this is something you're thinking about, I would encourage you to find a kink aware therapeutic professional, somebody who you can talk to, a counselor, a therapist that you can talk to about your desires for this fetish, and they can walk you through the aspects of of why this turns you on, why, and possibly uncover what it is that you're thinking about, and maybe a way to have a similar desire fulfill this desire. Number 3, the fetish of ripping off your dick. Erraticism is a fetish practice of ripping off one's cock and balls. Some professionals say it's less of a fetish and more of a sexual impulse done as a result of intense sexual shame. Some folks feel the urge to manually remove what they perceive to be the source of their sinful sexual impulses, which really is not your genitalia. Your sexual impulses come from your brain, but certainly don't rip your brain out. The result is a bloody, self-castrating mess. So if you're struggling with shame or your desires, or if you've ever contemplated something like erraticism, seek a therapist. There's a lot of kink-aware professionals out there that understand BDSM, understand kinks and fetishes, and can definitely provide a lot of help for you. You shouldn't feel shame for your body or for having sexual impulses. You should only feel shame if you're wanting to do things to others without their consent. Number 4 is the fetish of becoming an amputee. Acrotomophilia is a paraphilia. It's a sexual attraction to amputees and is somewhat common among fetishes. A more concerning fetish is apotomophilia. Sorry, these are hard to pronounce. The desire to actually become an amputee. If the fantasy of losing your lower leg turns you on, contact a therapist. It's probably something you want to talk about before, if ever, you do. Number 5 is called bug chasing. Bug chasing is when an HIV negative person seeks HIV. Bug chasing is actually a grinder terminology, a casual phrase for a heavily tabooed practice. Now, we first want to say that we're HIV positive. Like, in other words, we don't have any negative stigma against people with HIV. If you're being asked or asking someone to pause, that, say no for a couple of reasons. HIV criminalization laws are severe, and there's nobody's going to believe that someone asked to be infected, even if it's true. The laws exist because of widespread cultural phobia, an outdated legal system, one which refuses to understand the modern reality of HIV. And oftentimes, HIV positive folks are criminalized, while those who willfully and consensually play get a free pass. The second reason is you may not have a chance of spreading the virus. Even Some have a undetectable viral load. In other words, anyway, sorry, bug chasing is formed out of the fear of HIV. And the fear gets too paralyzing. Folks develop a fetish for getting it to alleviate that fear. HIV is now a manageable illness and hardly warrants any kind of paralyzing fear. But there's a line, however murky, when eroticizing someone's STI or risky sex in general, or eroticizing a virus that may come as a result of it. It's self-destructive behavior, and no one likes to be someone's fetish. No one likes for something about them that they, about their body or about their STI status. They don't want to be fetishized. It's just not good, decent human behavior. The fetish, number 6, the fetish for groping people in crowded places. It's called frauderism, and it's the fetish for touching strangers in a crowded place. This falls outside of BDSM. People do it on places like public transportation, and most people know this is groping. It's non-consensual. It doesn't pass RAC or SSC, and it's not okay. Don't engage in this kind of fetish. If you have this kind of fetish, seek therapeutic help. Number 7, the fetish for touching someone while they sleep. It's kind of terrifying. You get these paranormal activity vibe going on here. But somnophilia, it's a paraphilia. It's an erotic arousal from intruding on a stranger who's sleeping or waking someone up by touching them sexually. Oftentimes you'll see fake porn videos about this kind of thing, where someone is groping or touching someone while they're asleep, or waking them up from sex or waking them up with sex from sleep. But these porn videos are fake. They're for entertainment purposes only. They're not meant to be taken seriously. Consent can't be given when someone's asleep, so acting on this impulse falls far outside of RAC or SSC. It's molestation. It's sexual abuse, plain and simple. And you know what? It can be scarring to people, so don't do it. If this is a fetish that you're thinking about or something that turns you on, consider speaking with a kink-aware professional, a therapist that can help you out. Number 8 is the fetish for pubescent children. This is a big no-no. It's called hebephilia. It's different from pedophilia. It's a sexual attraction to children who have gone through the general age of puberty. Now, children cannot consent to sex as minors. You're not allowed to have sex with kids, period. This is a serious criminal offense. Don't do it. Don't ever do it. It falls outside of BDSM. It falls outside of all aspects of BDSM. If this is something you're struggling with, thoughts of, do not act on them. Find a kink-aware professional, someone who can deal with sexual fetishes and can deal with sexual kinks or desires or fantasies, and can help talk you down, talk you out of, and talk you through whatever traumas or things that you have dealt with in your life that are giving rise to this type of thoughts. Number 9 is the fetish for corpses. It's another thing that falls far outside of BDSM. Necrophilia is arousal from dead bodies. The dead, they can't give consent, and sexual pleasure from a dead body is regarded as a deep form of disrespect. Necrophilia is illegal in most of the United States. Most, but not all. North Carolina and Louisiana, the moral beacons that they are, allow necrophilia, even though Louisiana still bans sodomy between 2 consenting living adults. The sodomy ban is not legally enforceable given the Supreme Court's ruling, but it's still on the books. So this sexual fantasy, necrophilia, I wouldn't even call it a kink, First, it's criminal from in most places. It's very disrespectful to the dead and to people's family. And also, it is dead bodies cannot give consent. And so they fall outside of BDSM. And if it's something that you find as a fetish or a fantasy, consider speaking with a kink aware professional, a therapist, somebody that can help you deal through and talk through your sexual fantasies and help bring some clarity to the situation. Number 10, the fetish for accidents, tragedies, and disasters. It's a fetish that can kill you and others. People with this paraphilia get aroused watching or staging car crashes, house fires, collapsed bridges, natural disasters. There was a 1996 film called Crash, which was based on the novel of the same name. It starred Holly Hunter, and the characters of Crash get off from being in car crashes. It's kind of terrifying thinking about somebody or the collateral damage that could be occurred by staging crashes or house fires or staging, collapsing buildings. This is definitely something that's super dangerous. And if you have this kind of fetish or fantasy, as always, you'll hear the mantra. Consider talking to a kink aware professional. I mean, you're going to hear me say that a lot because these are different things that you definitely want to talk with somebody about before you go out and try to do any of those things. Number 11, this is the big one here. This is something that is not a part of BDSM. It never will be. It never has been. It is not a part and should not be a part of anyone's life. Pedophilia is the world's most widely known and severely criminal fetish. It's criminal for a reason. It leads to lifelong trauma and suffering for those who are abused. And it's discerned from hebephilia because the attraction is specifically to prepubescent children. It's sexual abuse. It's punished by law. It needs to be punished by law. It always should be punished by law. In the social arena, there are often buzzwords that are hurled at people who are not involved in pedophilia. Oftentimes, it hurts minority communities, and many LGBTQ people have been falsely called them by anti-gay and anti-trans people, convinced that they're bent on recruiting young people into the lifestyle. And oftentimes, people who are involved in consensual adult power exchange dynamics such as DDLG, MDLB, CGL, the daddy, mommy, little type of power exchange among adults, they get people sometimes throw this word at them, hurled as an insult, because people don't understand and aren't educated. But this bizarre and dangerous habit of pointing fingers and using scary social buzzwords actually makes the real problem worse because uh, that deviant behavior flies under the radar. And so definitely pedophilia is never okay. It's never okay. It's not a part of BDSM. It has no place in BDSM. If you are struggling with thoughts of these kind, then I would suggest a therapist, a kink aware professional would definitely be okay, but you definitely want to probably speak with a psychiatrist. It's it's a severe thing because it hurts a lot of people and causes a lot of trauma and a lot of damage to families and children. So don't abuse people. Number 12 is the fetish for dangerous, reckless, or illegal activity. It's called hybristophilia, and it eroticizes activities like robbing banks, street racing, playing Russian roulette, and daredevil stunts. There's a lot of danger involved with anything like that. Dangerous activity, you definitely want to be risk aware. You definitely you definitely need to do a lot of homework before you add anything intentionally dangerous or reckless. And definitely, we don't advocate for adding any kind of illegal activity to BDSM. Number 13, the fire fetish. Pyrophiliacs get turned on by starting fires or seeing open flame. Some like it hot, too hot. So if you're gonna play with fire, you definitely want to have the necessary tools and techniques to know how to put out the fire, and have the things to, if the fire gets out of control, things to rein it in. Definitely want to have emergency services or access to emergency services if you were to get a severe burn, or if a fire was to get out of control, someone you could call to come put it out for you. Number 14 is vor. Vorophilia is when you get turned on by the idea of eating another person's body parts or being eaten. It has some similarities with cannibalism, but often it's more of a fantasy, or it's more of a fantasy. It's not actually wanting to be eaten. Folks with this fetish can enjoy a plethora of manga, that's like Japanese comic art, on the internet. And vorophilia is generally been shortened to vor. Although the term vor wasn't popular in the time, the most famous case of erotic cannibalism is the Rottenberg cannibal. Armin, I can't pronounce his last name. He was called the Master Butcher. He ran a cannibalism fetish site out of his home in Rottenburg, Germany. In 2001, he placed an ad for a willing volunteer, a well-built 18 to 30-year-old, to be slaughtered and then consumed. Definitely illegal, does not fall within BDSM at all. Eating people, causing severe bodily injury is not being risk aware. It's not safe. It's not sane. It's not, it just falls outside of the scope of BDSM. Having the fantasy of vor without the cannibalism is definitely, there's definitely ways to simulate that, and, that can be okay. So definitely don't want the cannibalism. That's far outside of BDSM. But vor as a sexual fetish, viewing comic art and images such as that, definitely okay. Maybe something you may want to speak with a kink-aware therapist about, just so that you don't, stray into the cannibalism. Number 3 is not number 3. Number 15 is the crush fetish. Now, folks who enjoy the crush fetish, they get aroused by watching people crush small objects, maybe insects or animals. Yucky. Crushing animals, that's going to fall without consent. We don't want to do anything to animals to abuse them. Anything that is labeled animal snuff or videos which crushers, they're usually women in high-heeled shoes, crushing living insects or small reptiles, birds, kittens, or puppies. Ugh. That's, those videos are banned in a lot of places for good reason. And, we don't want to, people for the ethical treatment of animals really get involved with this. They, it's animal cruelty. It's illegal. It's definitely not something. If you're turned on by crush videos, you definitely want to talk with a therapist. You definitely want to get some help. For those, if those kinds of things are turning you on, you need to find out why. Why you feel that way. You definitely need to talk with someone. We don't want to get into animal cruelty that falls outside of the scope of BDSM. Number 16 is rape. Rape is a crime. It's one of the most overlooked and underreported crimes of all time. And, we want to state the obvious. Many people fantasize about rape, about raping someone or being raped themselves, but, having a rape fantasy scene or the word rape getting tossed around loosely among people that you play with, we definitely want to say that rape is a crime. It falls outside of BDSM. It does not have a place within BDSM. It is criminal activity, and it should be criminalized because a lot of people, despite the things that we say to eroticize our play, the sex that we have should always be consensual. A fetish role play may be extremely popular in the world of kink, but role play and rape, the line is drawn at consent. If you violate anyone, you should definitely not be doing that. That falls outside of consent. It falls outside of BDSM, and you're engaging in criminal activity. We remember I said earlier we want to be others focused. We don't want to be doing anything that is going to hurt other people, cause long-term trauma, injure them. We want to throw a phone number here for you to report rape. You can call the 24/7 National Sexual Assault Hotline. If you've been raped or you know somebody who has, you can call 1-800-656-4673. If you're listening outside the United States, I'm sure there's numbers that are available. You can probably Google them for your location. Number 17, the fetish for people with limited mobility. Many people with basiophilia, a fetish for people with limited mobility or for physical disabilities that create limited mobility, get turned on by seeing a disabled person struggle without the devices they need to get around. Like so many videos appealing to these terrifying fetishes, they've made their rounds on the internet, and they feature men and women struggling to crawl up a set of stairs, for instance. The fetish borders on cruel, and particularly if you take the step further and fantasize about disabling somebody so that you can watch them struggle and suffer. This falls outside of BDSM. Being cruel to people with disabilities is not a part of BDSM. It's not a good and safe way to express sadism. It's abusive, and it should be criminal, and it falls outside of BDSM. Watching somebody struggle and suffer in a predicament bondage scenario is a world different than making somebody struggle or suffer just because based on their disability. Number 18, the fetish for dangerous and cruel people. Hybristophilia is the sexual attraction to people who have committed or are actively committing cruel and terrible crimes like murder, rape, torture, etc. This is generally seen as an extreme extension of masochism. Definitely don't be around people who are committing murders, rapes, and tortures. Stay away from those people. Don't get involved with those people. If they're murdering, raping, and torturing others, there's a strong likelihood that an abusive person will abuse you. Don't be involved in relationships with them. If you're in relationships with them, definitely seek help, and definitely seek therapeutic help, and help from the legal system if needed. Number 19, it's a bad one here, suicide fetish. And it's somewhat of an auto assassination is where the paraphilia comes up from. It's hard for me to pronounce. This is the fetish of being aroused at the thought of your suicide. And folks with this fetish may speed down winding roads with their lights turned off to get aroused, and they find it tickling to tiptoe close to high ledges. We want to say that definitely get therapeutic help if you're dealing with suicidal thoughts or even erotic ones. You can call the National Suicide Prevention Hotline at 800-273-8255. Number 20, the fetish of falling downstairs. Climacophilia is sexual arousal from watching someone fall down a flight of stairs or falling downstairs yourself. Are you allowed to throw yourself down a flight of stairs? Well, not according to SSC. And likely it's a mental illness should you survive, because you're putting yourself and your life at a huge risk. And, are you allowed to throw someone else down a flight of stairs? No, never. It's not allowed. It falls outside of BDSM. It's not something that you should ever do. There is no way to mitigate the risk involved in something like that. Number 21, the fetish for non-human animals. Zoophilia is arousal from non-human animals like dogs, cows, horses, sheep. And it falls outside of BDSM. Animals cannot give consent. Just like an earlier fetish where there was cruelty to animals, it is definitely cruel to induce trauma on an animal who likely does not understand what you are doing to it. A quick internet search would come up with countless amateur videos of humans doing things to animals, and they're quite horrifying. And so, although SSC and RAC generally applies to humans because the animals cannot give consent. It's definitely not something that you want to engage in. If you're having thoughts of bestiality or zoophilia, or any of the associated kinks, doing anything erotic with animals, seek help from a kink-aware professional. Talk about those thoughts. Don't engage in that activity. Number 22, our last one of our 22 terrifying sexual fantasies, is the murder fetish. Sexologists and psychologists call it heterophonophilia. Others, and we call it homicide. And this is sexual arousal from killing someone. Much of kink and BDSM is about power play and power dynamics. A lot of really hot scenarios involve overpowering someone, but it's consensually. It's with respect to their limits, to their health, to their safety. It's a far cry from people who get aroused at the thought of killing. Folks with this fetish are dangerous. They need help. If you have reason to think someone you know has this fetish, contact the police. If you think you yourself have this fetish, maybe check yourself into a hospital, get some help. Remember, having a fetish is one thing. Acting on it is quite another. Our fantasies, our imaginations, they can take us to dark and really ethically compromising places. And so there's a lot of discussion that rages between the fine line between erotic desire and mental disorder. But in all cases, talk to somebody. Therapists, they exist to help us stay well. And so definitely find a kink-aware professional in your area and speak with them. So earlier and throughout this, I've said that things fall within and without BDSM based on consent and being able to give consent and get consent. Sexual consent is an agreement to participate in a sexual activity or a kink activity. Before being kinky with someone, you need to know whether they want to be kinky with you too. It's important to be honest with a potential partner about what you want and what you don't want. Consenting and asking for consent are all about setting your personal boundaries and respecting those of the potential partner, and checking in along the way, especially if things aren't clear or they move to a place that isn't clear. Both people must agree to the kink every single time for it to be consensual. Without consent, sexual activity, kinky activity, is sexual assault. It's assault. Um, so, what is consent? Well, consent is like FRIES, which is an acronym for freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. Freely given, consenting is a choice you make without pressure, without manipulation, or under the influence of anything that would impair you, such as drugs or alcohol. It's reversible. Anyone can change their mind about what they feel like doing anytime, even if they've done it before, and even if you're both in the process of doing it. Informed. You can only consent to something if you have the full story. For example, if someone says they'll use a condom and then they don't, there isn't consent there. Enthusiastic. When it comes to sex, you should only do stuff that you want to do, things that you find pleasure in doing, not things that you feel like you're expected to do or expected to want. In specific, saying yes to one thing doesn't mean that you're saying yes to others. You get the final say over what happens to your body. It doesn't matter if you've hooked up before or you've said yes earlier and then you change your mind. It doesn't matter if you're in a power exchange dynamic, that it doesn't mind if you've given away all of your limits before. If you come up to a place that you have a limit, you always have the final say over your own body, even if it means or costs you that relationship. It is your right. It's always your right. It's always been your right. Even in consensual, we talk about with slavery. Even in a consensual master-slave dynamic, you always have the right to end the relationship. You always have the right to come up with a limit at any time. It may cost you that relationship, but it is always your right. You're always allowed to say stop. Your partner needs to respect that. Consent is never implied by things like your past behavior, what you wear, or where you go. If you're at a fetish club, it doesn't mean that you're consenting to engage in all of the activity that is there. Sexual consent or kink consent is always clearly communicated. There should be no question, no mystery. Silence, it's not consent, and it's not just important the first time you're with someone. If you've had sex before or you've engaged in kink before, even if you've been together a long time, you need to have consent. There are laws about who can consent and who can't. People who are impaired, passed out, asleep, they can't consent. There are also laws to protect minors, and these are generally people under the age of 18. It varies from country to country, but it's meant to protect minors from being pressured into kink or sex with someone older than them. The age of sexual consent is how old a person needs to be in order to be considered legally capable of consenting. You know, don't become a sexual offender. The age of consent varies in different parts of the U.S. and different countries. We generally say 18 is a good standard, more of a even though it may be different from where you are. That's where we kind of draw it, that anyone under 18 is a minor and people over 18 are, generally speaking, adults. Rape, sexual assault, sexual abuse. It can have different legal definitions. Uh, and anyone can be a victim, no matter their gender, their sexual orientation, their age. Certain groups of people are more likely than others to experience sexual assault. Women, especially women of color, LGBT identified people, people with developmental and other types of disabilities, they're more likely to experience sexual assault over the course of their lifetimes. But we all need to play our part to make sure that this doesn't happen. We all need to make our to do our part to make sure that we're educated. We know what is and isn't consent. We know what is and isn't allowed. Especially with us in the BDSM community, we're held at a higher standard because we oftentimes engage in more communication and more education because the things that we're doing often require it. I am Primal Piggy. Thank you for joining me for this, where we talked about 22 terrifying sexual fantasies. We hope that you have a happy Halloween or whatever holiday that you are celebrating during this season. And we definitely want to be a resource for BDSM. And so you can find all of our resources at www.bdsmunited.com. It's been a joy talking with you today, even though we've been talking about some subjects, some hard things, some things that don't really belong within BDSM. And hopefully that I've made it clear. Wasn't trying to kink shame any legitimate kink, but I definitely want to shame things like abuse and cruelty and any kind of rape, torture, any of those kinds of things. Definitely want to tell you that you should have whatever amount of shame that keeps you from engaging in those types of activities. And you definitely need to find a kink-aware professional, someone that you can talk to that can help you work through your thoughts and to make sure that you don't do those actions. Again, I'm Primal Piggy. Thank you for joining me. It's Halloween. It's a very spooky time. Excuse me. But definitely it is also can be a fun time. And BDSM can be a lot of fun for those involved. When we are nonviolent, we're consensual, and we do BDSM in that way. It's been a joy talking to you. I'll talk to you again soon.